Engaging the NPA's Palanan, Isabela. July 1972. Swirling rotor blades created a cloud of dust. With their heads bent forward, a team of PC soldiers rushed to the rear doors of an Air Force A-1H helicopter at PC headquarters in Shoreline, Isabela, west of Palanan. As the last man went on board, the pitch of the swirling blades increased and the Huey pulled up. On board was PC Second Lieutenant Edgar Egay Aglipe PMA, 71, the Intelligence and Operations Officer of the Isabela Constabulary Command. Egay had just come from an emergency meeting called by Isabela PC Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Dyson, PMA 58. A ship unloading mysterious cargoes was sighted off Digoyo Point, Dyson told Aglipe. A certain Tony Gomez, on board a logging company plane, had spotted the ship and reported it to authorities. Higher headquarters believed it to be an arms shipment from China intended for the NPA. The AFP was alerted. The intelligence report said documents from captured NPAs revealed an arms shipment intended for the CPP-NPA, leaving a Chinese port using an unidentified fishing boat. The patrol ship swept through the rough seas from Bajo de Masinloc to Balantang/Bashi Channel for 4 days with negative results, until recalled by the Navy headquarters for another task in the Samar Leyte area. When a more precise report was relayed to Lieutenant Colonel Dizon, he immediately called an emergency meeting to ask for volunteers to verify the information and prevent the unloading of the cargo. Egay Aglipe volunteered to head the operation. With him on board, the Huey helicopter was the 9-man team assembled to perform the mission. Egay chose PC Second Lieutenant Napoleon Castro, Executive Officer of 116th PC Company, as his assistant team leader. The mysterious ship sighted was the MV Karagatan. It arrived under cover of darkness the night before, off the shore of Digoyo Point. A cache of arms for the NPA was on board. Expected to receive the shipments on shore were NPA rebels led by Victor Corpus and his men hiked 67 for 21 days along the Sierra Madre mountain range to reach the landing point. The coastal shore of Digoyo Point was an ideal site for the arms landing because it was practically uninhabited. The thick concentration of trees along the crescent-shaped shoreline hid it from plain view from almost all directions. The MV Karagatan's crew of 16 Filipino communist rebels, disguised as fishermen, had been along the shore of Digoyo Point for hours the night of July 3. Despite sending signals, the smaller boat assigned to ferry the arms to shore was nowhere. The vessel's crew began to worry. When morning of July 4 broke, they lowered a dinghy, took some rifles and rowed to shore. There was jubilation as Corpus's platoon emerged from their cover. The long and tedious process of unloading the arms shipment using small bancas had begun. At one point, a crate of arms fell into the water. The China connection. The CPP-NPA was desperately in need of more arms and supplies to bolster their chances of winning the insurgency war. Without those arms, they were no match to the firepower of the military. In mid to late 1971, CPP Chairman Jose Maria Sison sent several delegations to Beijing with a shopping list to be presented to Chinese officials. The first 2 delegations were headed by Ibarra Tubianasa, the third by Ricardo Malay. Fidel Aquili served as Sison's personal emissary. They negotiated for sizable quantities of M16 automatic rifles, ammunition, and heavy weapons, such as bazookas, mortars, and anti-aircraft guns, but the Chinese could only supply them with 1,200 M14 rifles, bazookas, mortars, communication equipment, and medical kits. The Filipinos also requested for a submarine to deliver the arms to the Philippines. The Chinese refused. Thus Aquili went to Japan to buy an old rusting boat, a 91-ton, 90-foot-long former fishing trawler named Kishi Maru. China allegedly paid for the purchase. The boat was rechristened the MV Karagatan. It set sail for Fujian Province on the southeast coast of China in mid-1972. Weapons were loaded in wooden crates at Fujian. Digoyo Point in Palanan, Isabela was the planned drop-off point. By the end of June 1972, the vessel was on its way to the Philippines. Ordered to proceed and patrol the northeastern coast of Luzon was the Navy ship RPS Pangasinan PS-31, a patrol ship then in Cebu for a different mission. The PS-31 was under the command of Commander Rogelio Dayan, with Ensign Guillermo Wong as executive officer. Its mess and supply officer was Ensign Joaquin Tan, PMA-71, Agai's classmate. Jack Tan was on his first shipboard assignment after graduating from the RAIC Naval Officers Qualification Course. Agai and Jack both belonged to Bravo Company when they were cadets. The PS-31 braved the high swells and huge waves brought by the Wai typhoon that was about to hit Digoyo Point. The crew's orders were to intercept the arms landing assessed by the intelligence unit to be north of the Philippines. The exact place of landing was not yet known. Because of the urgency of the mission, the crew chose to overtake the typhoon and take shelter at the vicinity of Fuga Island and Apari, Cagayan, while conducting radio patrol on the vicinity for any sea activity. Intercepting the shipment. The helicopter carrying Agay and his men landed near the town hall of Palanan. They were met by local police officials. Apprehension among the local populace was palpable. People told Agay that around 200 NPAs were there earlier, and they feared that an encounter with the military would lead to civilian casualties. The residents begged Agay and his men to pull out. Agay's immediate concern, however, was how to gather more troops. He expected intense resistance from hundreds of NPAs, so he summoned all local policemen to join them. His team members increased to 17 from the original 9. The urgency of the situation forced Agay to make quick decisions. Being undermanned was secondary to the urgent mission of verifying if there was really an arms landing at Digoyo, and to stop, by any means, any attempts to bring them in. The sighting of heavily armed NPAs is not just coincidental, Agay told his men. The arms landing is true. A plan of action was created. With the aid of a map, Agay pointed to the general southeast direction of Didadongan, Isabela, which is covered with huge timberlands. Several logging companies operated there. With a native guide, he decided to move tactically for 6 hours from Palanan to Bueno logging at Didadongan using a route not usually taken. A few hours earlier, the Air Force detachment at Camp Olivas in Pampanga was alerted when the ship was sighted by the civilian plane. The Air Force U-17, reconnaissance aircraft piloted by Lieutenant Camelo Menor, was dispatched. Menor made a pass and then circled over. The MV Karagatan crew must have realized then that the landing was compromised. To expedite the unloading of the cargo, the Karagatan captain decided to sail the vessel into the mouth of Digoyo River. Small bankas ferried the arms to shore. The unloading was completed just before sunset. Just as the crew was bidding farewell to their comrades on the ground, a pevia buzzed over the treetops. The vessel's crew hurriedly tried to maneuver the boat out of the river. Rolando Peña, the ship's navigator, advised the captain not to start the engine because they might hit a rock that might damage the propeller since they were going backwards. They should just let the current take them out of the river. But the captain was impatient, so they proceeded going backward through the engine's power. True enough, its propeller hit a rock that damaged its hydraulic system. The vessel could only move in circles, but somehow they were able to maneuver offshore. The mechanics identified the trouble and asked for some time to fix it. Agay's team reached the Bueno sawmill just before dark. They were informed of the sighting of heavily armed rebels. The natural action when confronted by a much bigger force is not to engage the force. In this case, however, it would be unwise and cowardly not to pursue the mission to verify and prevent the arms landing. To keep the military troops away, the sawmill folks offered to lend them the company's old barge along with its crew so they can get to Digoyo. Agay accepted the offer and decided to leave immediately so that they could use darkness as cover. He had to take some risks. I confess that I depended totally on the captain of the barge on how to reach and enter the coastal waters of Digoyo Point, Agay would recall years later. It was a long night for the team. The weather was bad because of the incoming storm. Big waves swayed the barge. Tired from the day's operations, most of them slept, unmindful of the turbulence. The trip lasted for 6 hours. As the barge neared the rusty but relatively bigger MV Karagatan, the captain woke Egai. It was very dark as the moon was covered by thick clouds. Egai thought that it was wise of the rebels to time this shipment based on the weather, because it was such a perfect cover for this kind of operation. He shivered as a cold breeze swept through his thin uniform. He instructed the barge captain to sail towards the ship. In the MV Karagatan, its captain had turned on the radar and saw something moving towards them. They could not, however, see the incoming moving object because the barge was not using any lights. What followed next caught Egai and his men by surprise. The rebel ship's crew wearing life vests frantically jumped overboard. Their captain had ordered abandon ship. They must have thought that a bigger ship was coming to get them, Egai surmised. If one only used his sense of hearing, he would conclude that the barge was a big ship. It was too old and did not have an engine silencer. If the MV Karagatan crew did not jump overboard and instead fired at us from the much taller ship, we would have been sitting ducks with no cover, and there would not have been a second Chief Philippine National Police from Class 71, Egai would much later tell his mistas. The myth that the Isabela NPA warriors were brave was broken by this incident, he added. As the rebels swam toward shore, Egai and his men boarded MV Karagatan. They did a quick search for any remaining crew. With a switched-on searchlight and using a megaphone, he yelled, "Who are you? What are you doing there?" There was silence. The fleeing crew had reached the shore. When daybreak came, the NPAs were now desperate to save their arms cache. The PC team tried to tow the ship using the barge. Volleys of fire from the NPAs in trenches at the rocky beach and hidden behind big rocks held them down. Around that small, flat, white beach strewn with stones were the mountain jungles, the rebels' only avenue for escape. They fired at the barge with rocket grenade launchers. They built a strong defense that was difficult to crumble. In the ensuing gunfight, the barge skipper and 2 soldiers, Constabulary Second Class Lope Domingo and Ramon Bibit Jr., were wounded. Realizing that they were outnumbered and outpositioned, Egai radioed for reinforcements. The bad weather and rough seas delayed the reinforcements for 3 days and 3 nights. The NPAs were likewise significantly slowed down by strong winds and rain as they struggled to save whatever arms they could carry to their jungle lairs. Although outnumbered, thirsty, hungry, and seasick, Egai rallied his men to defend the ship and prevent the NPAs from retaking possession of the ship. Reinforcements arrive. The Army troops with Second Lieutenants Eduardo Johnson and Arsenio Santos crossed the Sierra Madre from Palanan to Echagüe. They conducted pursuit operations. One of the ground troop reinforcements was led by Egai's classmate, Dick de Leon of the PC. At first Dick wondered, where are the 71 Army people? The Army group of 71 was on schooling and still 1 month shy of finishing the delayed infantry officers course and basic courses for signal, engineer, logistics, and quartermaster. Ruben Ganj rejoined the 20th Infantry Battalion in Isabela after finishing the infantry course. Dick and recent graduates of Scout Ranger Class 14 were recalled. He was to lead the group of 5 officers and 100 men. The order was for them to proceed without delay to Digoyo Point to clear its shoreline of NPAs before the landing of the ground troops from the Philippine Navy cargo ship. Assembly was at Villamor Air Base. The gathering resembled a reunion as Dick and his Class 14 classmates greeted each other. Air Force C-47 planes airlifted the troops to Palanan. A brief aerial survey was conducted via helicopter. Ground troop jump-off started at 11 a.m. At first, Dick thought it would take until the next day for them to reach Digoyo Point because negotiating the mountain ridge would take hours. The faster alternative was to take the easier route along the beach so they could be at Digoyo by sunset. Dick's instincts as a scout ranger, however, made him decide to take the mountain trail. Soon it would be proven that his choice was correct. "Let us spend the night at the top of this hill," Dick told his men. From where he was standing, he could not get a clear view of MV Karagatan. Mass of black clouds hovered above. At 4 a.m., he gave the order, "Prepare to go down the beach." Moving under cover of darkness is wise, he thought. The high tide, however, prevented them from crossing a wide creek. 2 hours were wasted as they waited until it became passable, around 7:30 a.m. 20 minutes later, they stumbled upon the first dead body, an Army soldier from the 4th Infantry Battalion. Not far, 2 more bodies were recovered. The bodies were later identified as that of Staff Sergeant Emilio Carragan, Sergeant Zacharias Quirino, and Private Amor Amora. Those soldiers were among the first ground troops to arrive at Digoyo on July 9 to help in weakening the rebels' stronghold along the beach. They were ambushed along the way. The ambush site was 50 meters long and overlooking the wide beach. The ambushers were strategically hidden behind rocks and trees. Dick's troops and the NPAs led by Vic Corpus PMA 67 were separated by about 2 hours. When Dick's troops finally reached Digoyo at lunchtime, the rebels had already left. They perhaps believed that waiting another day would compromise their primary goal of saving as many firearms as they could. Except for a few rifle shots fired by snipers positioned on top of the hill, no major battle occurred. The following day, Dick received a note, brought by a Dumagat messenger, from 2nd Lieutenant Arsenio Santos, who was leading an army platoon pursuing the rebels in the mountains. He was requesting for supplies as they were running out. The requested supplies were later airdropped, but the platoon never got them. Through an informer, the military had pinpointed the general direction of the rebels' retreat. Dick decided to move to that mountain area, only to be pinned down by 50 caliber machine guns. He requested aerial fire support from Air Force 1st Lieutenant Manuel Dalape PMA 67, his air operations contact. 2 PEFI planes fired on the rebels as they were dragging the crates containing arms. For days, coordinated air and naval gunfire support (NGFS) from RPS Pangasinan PS-31 were provided to soften the enemy's defense. Jet fighters, Hueys, U-17s, and T-34 planes bombing, recon and strafing missions, as requested by the ground troops, left the retreating enemy in disarray. The rebels were on the run. It was a race among government forces to reach the 2 NPA camps in the jungle. Dick's exhausted team was the first to get to the camp after creeping up the mountain for more than 3 hours. Army troops under Lieutenant Arsenio Santos and other units followed. The Ranger-trained units led by Dick recovered hundreds of M14 rifles, crates of ammunition, and sets of radios. The NPAs fled, bringing with them what they could carry, and gave no resistance to his attacking men. His men, in hot pursuit, were able to recover 10 more crates of M14s in bundles of 5. Along the way, pursuing troops found scattered crates of firearms abandoned by the fleeing rebels. Dick's Ranger troops secured the NPA camps with the captured firearms until the other AFP troops arrived and took over from there. It took weeks for the joint AFP task forces to clear the area of operations in Palanan and Digoyo Point. The NPA rebels and the MV Karagatan crew that participated in the arms landing had since gone south to Quirino province, walking through 200 miles of thick jungle and the rugged terrain of the Sierra Madre. By that time, the MV Karagatan already sank. With the vessel's propeller damaged, control was lost and the vessel was at the mercy of the swells, waves, and surf. The beach had huge rocks that probably caused the hole in the hull of the vessel. All in all, government troopers recovered 467 M14 rifles in 2 abandoned camps, plus those found scattered along the escape path of the retreating rebels. Hundreds more were recovered by the Navy's Underwater Operations Group team, headed by Ensign Wong as the operations officer of the Screen Task Group of the Amphibious Task Force that conducted diving operations to retrieve the firearms from the sea. The NPA managed to escape with about 200 of them in tow. The joint AFP operations yielded many medals. Agay Agape was awarded the Gold Cross, while Dick de Leon got his bronze. Agay was later thankful that he volunteered for the mission against MV Karagatan. Because of its success, he was promoted to captain ahead of his class. It was also a factor in his promotion as the first general of PMA Class 71, and eventually as chief of the Philippine National Police. The MV Karagatan incident led to the building of a naval station at Bicobian Bay in Isabela, a well-protected cove that could shelter a fleet of naval combatants. Navy Commander Carlos Agustin returned to the area in command of RPS Iloilo PS-32 in the summer of 1972, and by July, it was decided to move the first contingent of the naval station together with the Seabees, who would break ground to delineate the reservation, build the pier and the buildings necessary for the station. That station eventually became the headquarters of the Naval Task Group, headed by Commander Agustin in support of the Northeastern Command, NORISCOM. In Manila, the Palanan incident was presented as evidence of the serious intent of the CPP/NPA to overthrow the government. This gave President Marcos another reason to declare martial law all over the country on September 21, 1972.